Welcome to today's webinar entitled Reskilling and Upskilling, Cost, Risks, and Opportunities. My name is Anthony Campagnano, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Talent Guard. Before we get started, I would like to share some brief information about Talent Guard. At Talent Guard, we are passionate about solving skills-oriented business challenges. We believe that when you can describe your business, roles, and paths for people in the context of skills, you are better prepared to win in today's marketplace. Today I have here with me our guest speaker, Ben Ebbinghaus. Ben is the Principal Analyst at Lighthouse Research and Advisory, the author of Artificial Intelligence for HR, and the host of the We're Only Human podcast, which focuses on talent trends and technologies. Ben, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Good to be here, everybody, and looking forward to a fun conversation. So as he was mentioning, I'm an analyst, I'm a researcher. I spend a lot of time digging into the nuts and bolts of what makes companies tick, both on the technology side of the equation as well as the practices and the process side of the equation as well. And while I spend the days doing that now, I started my career as an HR executive, as an HR professional, leading a talent team. And that was a lot of fun. This is the only thing more fun than that I've been able to find so far. So I'm bringing to you today a little bit of practical experience, expertise, hands-on stuff, as well as some research, some data, some examples from what we've seen in the market and what we're continuing to kind of cover. So big picture today, and I would love for this to be as dynamic as possible. So throw in questions, comments as we're going through. I know we're going to capture those and have some time to respond towards the end. But as we're going through, if something occurs to you or you're curious about something, please throw a question in there because I'd love to try to answer that for you. Through the conversation, we're going to touch on three big pieces today. First, we're going to look at a little bit about the costs and the risks around the reskilling and upskilling, what that looks like, things to think through, how to create some leverage to build a business case to get your own leadership team brought into this. We're going to look at some opportunities, things that you can think about in terms of maybe low-hanging fruit, turning the problem over a little bit so you can think about it in a different way. And we're going to wrap up with some very practical ideas. That is the one thing I want you to walk away from this conversation with. It's a handful of to-do list items, not to make your to-do list longer, but to give you some specific things that might help you to feel like you can have a better handle on this bigger conversation around reskilling and upskilling. So it's going to be a good conversation today. I'm really excited to share some new research with you and to dig into this conversation as well. So to start off, I want to encourage you to think differently. We're talking about reskilling and upskilling, obviously, and I'm going to talk about the definitions of those in just a moment. But I want you to think about this in terms of the goal of learning isn't just learning. It's not just about helping someone to pick up a new skill. It's about performance. It's about helping them to be better tomorrow than they are today. And so as we're going through this, I'll come back to that towards the very end to remind you of this. But the goal of this is not just to provide some new skill to someone else just to make them happy. Right? There are engagement values in that. There are retention values. We'll talk about those as we go through. But the goal of learning at the end of the day is about performance and helping people to be their very best so that you can serve your customers at the very best levels. Before we go any further, I want to take a minute and really set a little foundation for us as we're going through the conversation. Some of the things I'll say reskilling, upskilling at the same time. Some of them are a little more tailored towards one or the other, but I want you to really have a good sense of what we mean by each of those concepts. So upskilling, the way we define that at Lighthouse is about teaching someone to be more valuable while they stay in their current role or helping them to level up, but staying in their same kind of silo in the role they are, helping them build new skills, helping them learn new things. And an example of that is Amazon. So they actually have kicked off a recent campaign around upskilling their people because they have realized that some of the things that their people are doing are a little bit outdated. And so they're trying to add some new capabilities, add some new skills. They're going to be doing the same job next year as they're doing this year for these people they're upskilling, but they're trying to add some new capabilities to them so they're more valuable. They have a richer set of experience. They have a richer set of capabilities to deliver a higher value in the same roles they're already doing. So that's what upskilling, it's about helping them to level up in that way. Reskilling is fundamentally different. Reskilling is about training someone to do a different job, teaching them something because maybe part of their job is going away, part of their job is obsolete, part of their job was eaten by automation, part of that job doesn't exist in the market anymore. There's no more market demand for it. There's a lot of things that lead to a reskilling conversation, but at the most basic level, reskilling is about changing someone into a different role entirely. And so a good example of that one is AT&T. Their story is a really interesting one. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check it out. Do a quick search and you can find it. But they are on this continuous path to reskilling 100,000 of their workers. So they have over 200,000 people at AT&T. And a few years ago, someone looked up and said, "Wait a minute. These people are working on this old analog technology, this old hardware, this old stuff. We don't buy this anymore. We don't sell this anymore, and we're barely able to service it anymore because it's so old and antiquated. What is going to happen when those things start failing, or we stop having to serve customers with those types of technology, or replace those with newer digital technology? What does that mean?" Well, that means that all of those people doing those jobs, and when they started tallying that up, there were 100,000 people at their company that were focusing on those types of hardware that were becoming obsolete. And they said, "Wait a minute, we've got to do something about this. We've got to reskill these people to focus on the new digital technologies, or we're going to be in a really tough spot because the people we have will have skills we don't need anymore." It's going to be a challenge there. So we're talking about reskilling, upskilling. Those are the two big pictures of what they look like, what they mean. And as we go through again, I'll try to point out some of the examples are a little more tailored towards one or the other, but I wanted you to have a really good understanding of where we come from. We're talking about those pieces of it. So why conversation about this right now? Why are we talking about reskilling, upskilling? You probably, if you've been, reading the news this week, you've probably seen a headline about it. It's all over the place. Everyone's talking about this. There's a couple things driving it. One of those is the fact that new research is coming out from McKinsey, from Pew, from other research organizations that say a lot of the work that's being done today, a significant portion, up to 30%, as we see here from the McKinsey study, up to 30% of the jobs that are being done, the tasks that are being done, can be automated within the next 10 years or so, which means that the fundamental landscape of work and how it gets done is going to change dramatically. If you knew that 10 years from now that 30% of your job was going to disappear, be eaten by an algorithm or something else, be taken up by that, how would you change how you're approaching the work that you're doing and reskilling and developing yourself for performance? So that's a big piece of this. The second one is tied in with a couple different things. So every company is now a tech company. And one of the stories there that pops my head, so GE a couple of years ago, they ran this really fun commercial campaign on TV about Owen, this young man that had just gotten a job at GE, and he's telling his family, and they're like, "But I thought you got a software degree, and like, why are you working at GE?" And it was their attempt to help the bigger market know through employer branding that they were not just an old legacy hardware company. They're a software company, they're a digital company, they're a cool company, if you will. And so they're trying to reset the public expectations and perception of the company as a whole. And that story is happening at companies all over the place. There's a company I want to talk about a little bit later that is actually using hackathons internally as a way to compete with some of the bigger tech companies because they're hiring for the same kind of talent. Because every company is focusing on this, everyone is requiring that. It's changing some of the kinds of work that gets done and some of the ways that we need to skill people. And the last piece here, the transparency component. One of the topics I love most, I love researching, I love sharing about, I love helping employers with, is around talent ability. And we're going to talk about some of the research we've done on that topic in the coming 40 minutes or so. But what I love about it is it ties in really well with this conversation of reskilling someone for another role. Because if I am being reskilled or I'm being upskilled and someone is helping me find out what the next career path is for me at this company, that feels really, really powerful from an employee perspective. Imagine your employer comes to you and says, "We found out that a portion of your job is going to go away, but here's what we're doing to help you prepare. We're giving you these tools. We're giving you this training. We're going to help you with these career paths here. There's some options we can lay out for you." Being very transparent and open with that. We're going to talk in a minute about this idea of how much stress this causes for employees to be in that kind of space. There's a lot of data out there. That McKinsey stat right there is in the news. People talk about it all the time. And if you hear that as the average employee, that's worrisome. That's a little bit scary if you don't know what your company is planning to do about that. If you don't know that they have plans to help take care of you or to upskill you or to prepare you for what's going to come. So those are some of the things that are driving this conversation around reskilling. And what's fun for me is, as an analyst, I talk to a lot of HR leaders, talent leaders, learning professionals, and all of them are coming at the problem from a little different perspective, but all of them are talking about it, even from a talent acquisition perspective. Everyone is focused on this because they want to make sure that they're doing the right things, that they are preparing their people for the future. And again, the goal today is to help you get a little better handle on this big picture problem and some things you can do to tackle it. So the first part that we're going to dig into is this idea of some of the costs and the risks. If you work for a company and you are leading the talent function, or if you're working on the talent team, you're working on the HR team, even the learning team, if you're working on that side of the house, and you're trying to build a business case for why you should be focusing on reskilling, why we need to get more serious about upskilling, we're going to give you some ideas in here to help you build that business case to get some leverage. And actually, in a little while, I'll give you a specific kind of template that I use for employers that are trying to build a specific targeted action plan for how to carry that out. But these will give you some stats, some figures, some things to help you think about this from both a macro perspective and a micro perspective on how to really target this and make it happen. So the first one, I admit it, I'm a data nut, so I had to share one of these charts that is like impossible to understand, but I'll give you the really easy version of it. So if you look here, you can see each of these years across the top, these lines are projections of how much productivity the United States labor force is going to have year to year. So that very first line you see, that was their projections for how productive our workforce is going to be. And we didn't quite hit that. And so the next year they revised that. A couple years later, they revised that. They keep revising it over time because we are not, as a workforce, as productive as we should be based on the data, the numbers they have, the technological advances, those things. They expect us to be as productive at a certain level, and we're not hitting that. We keep trying to get more productivity, but it's diminishing. And I want to look at that for a second because there's a couple of parts to this that tie in. The first part is so much more of our work today than ever before is knowledge work. The capabilities, the things you're delivering to customers, there might not be any physical product at all. It might be a lot more service, or it might be a lot of just things happening in someone's head. A lot of the capabilities and things aren't being delivered hands-on anymore. And it's one thing to say you are working on an assembly line and I will give you an extra $1 an hour if you can build one more widget an hour. Well, there's a very clear set of guidelines, a very clear set of rules, and most people can understand that, and that will motivate them. But if you are a creative, or if you work on a talent team, and I say, I need you to be, more creative, or I need you to be more productive in general, even if I pay you a little money, you can't do that. It doesn't work the exact same way. There's not a linear connection to that. And one of the other parts of this is this general uncertainty about skills. We keep hearing this conversation about skills gaps. How are we going to be productive as an overall population, as an overall workforce, if we have skills gaps that are preventing us from getting the most out of the people, getting the most out of the work that we're trying to do, things like that. So a couple things layering into this conversation. And I just want you to see on a big picture, we're going to go like really wide all the way down to a very narrow example at the end of this section to help you get your arms wrapped around this concept of why this is happening. One of the people that I admire most, if I get a chance to clap my hands for a second for somebody, Seth Godin has been around for quite some time. He is a marketing expert, but more than that, he's a business expert. And he really looks at the trends that are happening in business. He predicted a lot of the things before they came to pass about how social and viral marketing was going to work and things like that. So he's really sharp as a business mind. And he recently was interviewed about what is happening in terms of skills, in terms of skills gaps and disruption in the marketplace, and what does that mean for hiring? And he said, any job that I can fully define down to the nth degree, like I can tell you every detail of every single task the person's going to do, if I can define it that well, I can find someone else to do it cheaper. The inverse of that is if there's a lot of uncertainty in the job, if there's a lot of creativity needed, if there's a lot of critical thinking required, it's much harder to hand that off to someone at a low level that will take half as much money to do that job. But at the same time, our research shows that it's also hard to hand those things off to an algorithm or to automation or to even an AI system to do that, because those systems only work when it's really narrowly defined and there's very strong parameters and there's very little uncertainty. The more uncertainty there is, the more focus there is on the human tasks and on needing high quality talents to be able to pull those things off and to be able to support those kinds of tasks. So the more undefined the job, the more likely there will be an opportunity for us to stick around and keep doing the work that we're doing. And I know from my time working in kind of the talent space, there's often a lot of uncertainty in the kind of tasks and things that we have to do day to day in general, overall. So one of the studies I'm going to cite a couple times today, I want to give you the really quick groundwork of that. We did a study last year on disruption driving a need to reskill. We kept hearing from employers that they were hearing from their employees that they were worried about this, all the headlines saying, robots are going to take your job. AI is going to consume this industry. There's all these stories and things, and people are worried about it. So we were hearing from employers. So we ran a study to understand the extent of that problem, how employers are prepared to face it or not, as we'll hear in a little bit. And so some of the stats we go through from this disruption drivers reskilling study were from that piece of research. And the headline from that, we asked these employers how many of them thought disruption automation were going to disrupt and create a need to reskill their workers. And 8 out of 10 of them said absolutely. And because of that reality, an overwhelming number of businesses are seeing disruption that drive their reskilling priorities. They're trying to figure out, okay, what do we do next? If we take this bait, we say this is important, we say this is going to happen, what do we do? How do we prepare for that? One of the other things we did in that study, in addition to asking employers, we also asked the employees themselves about how their employers are preparing them for these things. And one of the things that surprised me in that study was only 60% of employers are actually tracking the skills of their workforce. The other 40% are not doing it on a regular basis or not doing it with any sort of uniformity. They're just doing kind of ad hoc on an ad hoc basis, and they're missing the opportunity to really understand what the capabilities are of their people. In addition to that, though, what's perhaps even more frightening is about 1 in 5 workers don't even know if their employers know what their skills are at all. Think about that for a second. If you are a line level employee working for a large organization, if you don't know if your employer understands your skills, cares about your skills, knows about your skills, and wants to tap into your skills, that's not a very engaging picture. That's not a very exciting place to be. How do you know if they can't make use of your capabilities, so they don't know what they are? And so it creates this kind of dismal picture of your future at that organization where you're basically doing what you've always done, but you don't have an opportunity to move up or to grow or develop because they don't know what you can do. So not only is it an issue on the business perspective, we don't know who we have, so we can't tap into them, but also from the employee perspective, the bottom up perspective, if they don't care about my skills or they don't know what my skills are, even if you want to know, if you don't know what they are, you can't tap into that. You can't use those strengths. We always say we want to tap into the bench strength of the business, right? Tap into the bench strength of the employees. But if you don't know what you have on the bench, you can't tap into that at all. So it's a big gap there, a big opportunity. So a minute ago when I mentioned some of the stress, the McKinsey stat, employees have a lot of stress in general about what's happening in the world because they hear things from the market, they hear things in the news, but they don't always hear things from their employer. And I threw this in there just as a reminder. Obviously, this kind of uncertainty is the only thing that drives stress for employees, but it's a reminder that you have the opportunity, you have the availability to actually eliminate or alleviate that stress that they're feeling around uncertainty by being more transparent with them, by being a little more open about what you see in the market, how it's going to affect your company, how it might affect their certain jobs, and helping them to understand that you have a plan for how to attack that, a plan for how to approach that. Even if the plan is a long term, it's not an immediate snap your fingers and we're done. In the AT&T story, obviously that wasn't the case. They can't overnight prepare 100,000 workers for what's next. But if you are preparing for that and you have laid that out for the employees to understand what you're doing to try to attack that and support them, that feels fundamentally different. That transparency breeds trust, and that trust breeds engagement, and they want to stay there. They want to support the company. They want to continue contributing and find ways to add more value and find ways to support the company because the company has actually taken a step and been open about how they're trying to support the employees themselves. So it's a couple of big picture things there. I'm going to narrow that focus really specifically here for a little bit on the next two slides and give you an example that hits close to home for me. Right, I worked as a recruiter at one time, and so when I was developing this is a different study we did last quarter, fourth quarter of 2019. We were doing a study on companies with 5,000 or more employees. We're talking to talent leaders at those companies, and we asked them about the competencies, the capabilities that they want to see in recruiters and in the leaders of the recruiting function, the talent leaders. We asked them, are these things important? And this chart here represents those people that said these skills are important for recruiters or for leaders. The yellow line is, yes, these are important for recruiters. The blue line is, yes, these are important for leaders. And what surprised me, I'll tell you, we do a lot of research, and I expected to see these numbers up in the 70, 80, 90% potentially. And it really surprised me to see these numbers all falling between 40 and 60%. Some of them just 50-50, half and half, saying these are important, and some of them saying they're not. And I was really kind of stunned by that. I was surprised, and I want to understand why. Because if I asked you point blank, do your talent leaders need to be more strategic? Almost all of us would say yes. If I said, do your talent leaders need to be able to use technology to be able to scale up the practices that they're putting in place? We would all say yes. But in this study, they weren't quite that strong in responding. So here's what happened. I went back through the data, and I found a question that I thought might give me some insight. And I cut the data, one of those questions that you saw on that previous chart, I cut the question by this other question that says, is AI making recruiters more important, or is it having no real effect? Is it just a buzzword? And for those people that said AI is making recruiters more important, look, almost 80% of them said, yes, recruiters must be more strategic, more consultative with the business. That truly blew me away. Again, this is more like what I expected to see in that set of data. And so going back to the last page, right, if you believe that something like AI is going to make the recruiter's role more important, or if you think disruption is going to mean that we have to be more targeted in our recruiting and be more careful and be more proactive in our recruiting, you would have said yes to all of those things we showed on that last slide. Being better at analysis, being better at strategy, being better at building relationships and being data oriented and using technology and all of those things. But if you think that something like AI, or if we just substitute in general, right, technological disruption is going to have no effect, or it's not that big of a deal, you're not going to focus on these new and different skills. And this is just a micro example. This could apply to any role, right? Marketing, accounting, anything you can think of. But if you think that these technologies, this sort of disruption is changing and emphasizing the human skills, you are more likely to start developing and making decisions about where to upskill and where to reskill people. If you think that it's just a buzzword and we're going to continue on our merry way the way we always have, then you are not going to make those changes. You see here at the bottom, I think it's going to have no effect. You're more likely to say no. They don't need to have those other skills. They don't really need to be more relational, more strategic. That doesn't really matter. And so this is a microcosm of the bigger picture of what's happening out there. But it's a reminder that some companies right now in that study, as we saw, said, we don't think technology is going to change the role of the recruiter or the role of, insert whatever job you want to put there, job family. And because of that, we are making a decision consciously to not develop them in these other areas, even though all of the data that we're seeing tell us that these things are coming. These things are changing jobs in lots of ways, and jobs you might not imagine either. We always assume a robot is going to take over a job in a factory somewhere, but there are algorithms and AI tools that are taking over attorney roles and the legal profession and so on. So it's not always the one that you imagine, some low skill worker somewhere. Some very highly trained people, professionals, are also losing parts of their jobs because of automation, because of AI and other types of things there disruptively. All right, catch our breath. One of the stories that illustrates this really well, this is one of our last pieces before we move on to some opportunities. I think I probably got you really good and worked up now, but one of the stories I love to tell is the story of Netflix and Blockbuster. And it's because most of us have the story wrong. If I asked you, why did Netflix beat Blockbuster? You would probably say, well, it's because Netflix went online. right? They went on the internet, and that was everything. That solved the problem. That beat Blockbuster. But what if I told you that Blockbuster actually also had their own online platform where you could rent movies, and you could actually take your movies back and return them in and swap them out at a store, at a physical store. So you got the benefit of both. So Blockbuster didn't lose because they didn't have an online platform. They actually lost because Netflix built an algorithm that was so well crafted, so predictive, that right now, if you use them as a service, they know with almost complete certainty if you're going to watch something before they even release it to you, before they even create a new movie, create a new TV show. They know with almost complete certainty whether you are going to consume it or not, based on your patterns, your usage patterns over time. We're, as much as we like to think we're unpredictable, in some ways we're very predictable. And that is what Netflix used to beat Blockbuster. The way that ties in with this bigger conversation is Blockbuster delayed taking action on this. They slowed down. They weren't fast enough to kind of keep up with this. And I want to caution you that if you're one of those companies, like on that last slide, that saw, I'm not sure if this is really, maybe it's more hype than anything else. Maybe we don't really need to prioritize reskilling yet or upskilling yet. You think that you can reskill your people twice as fast. If you fall behind, we'll just, we'll put more money into it. We'll put more time in it. We'll put more people on it. But you can't catch up that quickly. We all know this is the work we do day to day. We all know that change management is a big part of anything that we're gonna roll out. And something as big as reskilling a significant portion of your workforce or having to upskill across a big swath of your team, those things can't happen overnight. Those things require a lot of change management and a lot of prep and a lot of emotional energy to be able to put those together and make those happen. Your people can't handle you working twice as fast or twice as hard to try to catch up. So I want you to understand that this is not something to wait and see. This is something to go ahead and jump in, dip your toes in. And again, in a minute, I'll give you some examples of how to make that happen. I have said the word practical a couple of times, and I think that's one of the things that I love about the work that I do. I try to find lots of examples that illustrate these concepts and help to give you a real picture of a real company and what they're doing so that you can understand maybe what to do or what not to do in this case. So a few years ago, I was contacted by, not a few years ago, last year, I was contacted by a financial institution. They have 40,000 employees, and they said, hey, we're building some digital teams. We're trying to be more agile as an organization. We're trying to be more responsive. We're trying to make sure and embed these like digital competencies across the organization. And I was like, well, that's amazing. That's really impressive. How many teams do you have? They said, well, we're trying to build 30 teams and we have 3. Okay, so you're early days. And they said, well, we've actually exhausted all the skills that we know about in the company that are kind of focused on these things. And we're stuck now. We're trying to figure out what's next. And so that's when they had reached out. They're trying to understand how to get better at understanding the skills of their team and how to get better at mobility. So I said, how many of the people in your organization, if you had to put a number on it, what percent of them do you know the skills they have beyond their job title? You should know all the job titles. You can run that report from your HR system pretty easily. But beyond that, what are their actual skills? They said, probably 10%. I said, okay, so think about this. I want you to understand, you have 36,000 employees walking around wearing your company logo, wearing your badge, that you have no idea what their capabilities are beyond their job title. You don't know what their last job was even. You don't know what other skills they have. What are they really great at? What are their weaknesses you need to stay away from? Make sure you don't put them on that project because they don't have that capability. You don't know what those competencies are. So the story is a great reminder that we've got to get clear on the skills, and we'll talk about that in the coming slides about how to really do that. But you got to get clear on the skills that you have if you want to try to get better. If you want to try to either reskill people, if you want to upskill them, or if you're doing like this company was, they were just doing this as a smaller initiative within the business to try to help make the company a little more agile, to focus on digital transformation. That was just a specific project they're working on. This wasn't even a whole company reskilling kind of initiative. It was just a smaller scale. And even then they capped out because they didn't understand the capabilities of the people. So we're going to talk for a second about some opportunities and look at some things there, some low-hanging fruit potentially, and some ideas that can help you think about this problem in a more cohesive kind of way. So this chart I love. I saw this about 2 years ago, and now I use it every chance I get because it paints a really powerful picture. So this each of these bars here, the blue and the yellow, represent two different parts of S&P 500 market value. And if I were to ask you what those represented, I'd be curious to know what you said, right? It's always fun in a live setting, but think about that for a second. What do you think those represent? Those are two different things as part of the market value of those companies. And 3, 2, 1. Here's what they represent. The yellow bar here represents intangible resources, things that are not physical assets of the business. The blue represents physical assets as part of the overall market value of a company. So for example, in 1975, more than about 80% of a company's value was in land, buildings, physical assets, property, those kind of things that you can put your hands on as a physical asset, a tangible asset. Only a small portion of that relative to that was in intangible things. But fast forward to just a few years ago, 2015, about 80% of that value is in things intangible, things that we can't put our hands on. It's intellectual property. It's the skills and capabilities of your people. It's the knowledge they have. So much more value relative to the physical buildings and so on. So it's a reminder, big picture, that our skills, the capabilities of our people are the currency of the business. How things get done, how customers get served, how projects get completed. It comes down to the skills, the competencies, the capabilities of your people. And one of the analogies I love is your finance team spends all day looking at spreadsheets, looking at forecasting, planning. They can tell you to the penny how much you spent on pens and Post-it notes last year as an office. But we don't put that same level of rigor around how we track, how we look at, how we measure skills as part of the business. And I argue that we should be putting that much effort into it. We should be really, really targeted, really specific at what's happening on a skill and a competency level so we can understand what our organization can tap into. I said earlier, we always want to tap into the bench strength, but if you don't know what's on the bench, you can't tap into it. And that's a reminder here. If you're not measuring it, if you're not planning for this deliberately, then it just becomes, an afterthought, if at all. And we're missing an opportunity there to play a really strategic role in what's happening in the business. One of the stats, one of the numbers we pulled out of that study that we did last year, the Reskilling drives disruption drives reskilling study, is we asked talent and learning leaders about how much it costs to reskill an employee for a different role. We gave them some different choices there, and over 90% of them said it costs $10,000 or less. So over 90% of talent leaders said it costs $10,000 or less to train someone, reskill them for a different role, if we had to focus on that. If we have to hire them from outside the business, it's going to cost at the median salary of $50,000 at least $15,000 to do that. And that cost is made up of a couple things, right? Not just the recruiting costs, but also the time of the recruiter, the time to the time to onboard them, the time to train them as a new employee and get them kind of embedded in the culture, that lost productivity for the first few months as they're getting ramped up. All those things kind of wrapped in creates a large cost. And that's just for someone making $50,000. If it's for a software engineer that you start at 100, double that. If you're starting someone at 150 as a marketing executive, triple that. It costs more and more the more expensive that person is. But the interesting piece about the reskilling is the people know your culture. They already know generally the way the business works. They know the key players, and they can more easily adapt to a new role. And it costs less money to transition them over. When you look at an overlap of the job that you're trying to slot them into and the job they have now, you'll often find a pretty heavy overlap of the skills that they have, as long as you understand their skills. And that makes it pretty easy I won't say pretty easy. I want to be careful using that word. It makes it easier and less costly and less risky than hiring someone from outside the business. I'm always careful about not overloading a slide with a lot of content, and I'm giving you this warning before I pop this one up there. This is a table that I'm going to show you that I use. I build it out and customize it when I'm working with different employers, but a table that you can use to build a business case for how to get different stakeholders in your business on board with this idea of reskilling and upskilling. If you're trying to sell that internally, you're trying to get them on board and excited, using some of those stats that I showed you earlier about why this matters, you're using those, wrap it into this and think about this as a framework for how to have those conversations with different types of stakeholders in the business. So I'll give you a couple examples as we go through here just to kind of make it real, make it tangible for you. So the first one there, on the executive side, let's say you're talking to your executive team, you're trying to get them to understand this. The things that they care about here in the interest column, the things that matter to them are your business agility. Is the business ready to respond to certain demands of the market, demands of the customers? What about competitiveness? Are we able to compete with other companies that are in our space because we have the right skills, or are we behind the curve? And then at the end of the day, it's always about the bottom line. It's always about the financial piece of that. So the ROI, is there a return on money we're pouring into this investment? So the communication points column there, again, this is a generic example. It might be more targeted if it's at a certain industry or certain company, but just to give you an idea, these give you some ideas on how to start thinking about how to have conversations, how to start those conversations with them in a way that gets their interests, gets their attention. I always say if you work in HR and talent and you walk into your leadership team and you say, our engagement score went up 3 points, most of them won't care. We'd like for them to, we want them to, but most of them just don't care, because in the big picture, number one, it doesn't mean that much. There's no clear translation of what that means, and they also might not understand even what does engagement ultimately mean for the business. But if you went in there and said, our engagement score went up 3%, and that means based on our historical records that our profitability is going to be up 2% this coming quarter, well, suddenly they care. Suddenly they're interested. Suddenly they want to have that conversation to understand more about it. And this is the same thing. You've got to go to them and speak in their language, the things that they care about, the way that they think and process information on a regular basis. That is how you're going to go with them, and that's how you're going to get their attention and get them kind of bought into this. This is managers on it as well. So, right, you talking to your managers, they care about the performance of their team. They care about retaining those employees. They don't want to turn them over. They don't want them to be, concerned and worried about what disruption is going to cost their job. And so they want to help prevent those things. So get them on board with that. Even the employees can be a stakeholder. Depending on the team you work on, other teams under the HR umbrella can also be stakeholders. If you work in HR, a learning team can be a stakeholder. If you work in learning, the HR team can be a stakeholder, trying to bring other people in that have aligned goals and parallel tracks, but might not have the exact same language that you do. So you need to focus and kind of differentiate that a little bit. A way that I heard someone recently kind of put this in really great terms. So there's one named Mary Finch. She is the executive vice president, chief HR officer, CHRO at AECOM. And she said that one of the turning points happened for their team when their talent and learning teams started looking for opportunities to co-create a solution that the business needed. Not just saying, well, that's a learning problem, let's let them handle that. Or, wow, that sounds like a talent problem, good luck, guys. But how can we find ways to work together? Because we both want the same goal. We want an employee workforce that's developed, that's engaged, that's excited, that sticks around. We want all those same kinds of outcomes, but they often are very siloed. And so her comment was, it's not just about putting those two heads together, or those two teams together, just for the diversity of thought, but also because each one of them is going to get a different level of buy-in at a leadership perspective, from an employee perspective, and they can lend support, lend credibility to each other. So they find a way to do that. So I thought that was a really, really great piece of advice from Mary at AECOM. That was really, really insightful. One of the other facts that we found in that study that, again, surprised me, actually. The first part didn't surprise me, I'll admit that. 7 in 10 workers said they have left the job because they didn't have any development opportunities. They did not see a path for growth. But what did surprise me is that 95% of those people said, I would have stayed if there were opportunities present. 95% from a statistical perspective is almost unheard of. It's very, very rare to see something that high. Humans are too different. And so to see that paints a picture of something that's fairly accurate, holds true across a lot of organizations, a lot of industries, a lot of company sizes, even a lot of job functions, the kinds of roles people are doing. if we give them a path, if we give them an opportunity where they can see a future, they will want to stay. They will want to stick around. They will want to perform at their very best because we have shown them that we care enough to think about their future at the company. Think about your own job for a second. When your company made an offer to you, that probably felt really nice. I can think of the times I got an offer and it feels really nice to be wanted. This stat talks about making them feel wanted all over again. When there's a development opportunity, when there's a reskilling challenge coming up for your job, and we choose you again, from an employee perspective, that feels very powerful. And I mentioned earlier a couple of times the transparency piece, but being transparent builds trust, and trust builds engagement, and that is a virtuous cycle. The more engaged they are, the more transparent you can be with them because they understand and are bought into the mission and the vision of the company and what you're doing. Okay. On the home stretch now. So we're going to talk a little about some practical solutions, some ideas there to wrap this in and to make it as tangible as I can. The idea of a reskilling or an upskilling program is still a big thing to wrap your arms around. But I'm going to give you some things as we go through here to think about. Maybe make some notes for yourself, maybe make some action items for ways to explore these within the context of and the confines of your own business, your own strategy, to make sure that you are able to kind of make this work. You're able to make this a reality. We did a study a couple years ago, and what we found is that companies that are high performing, companies that have better, not just engagement, but better revenue and better employee retention. They have the good metrics across the business. Those companies that have those high metrics, the better metrics, are twice as likely to use a learning strategy when they're trying to decide how to tackle a problem like reskilling or upskilling. But they're also on the back end, after the fact, more than twice as likely to think about how to measure the impact. How do we track this progress? How do we make sure we hit our objective? How do we know our goal was achieved or not? And I would encourage you, if you are already one of those companies that is doing those things, we can always get a little bit better. We can always measure more things. We can always be a little more, specific about how we're targeting those and using those insights. If you're not doing it though, and you feel like you're behind and everybody else is ahead of you, don't worry. There are still plenty of companies that haven't yet gotten any level of real maturity around that, and it's not too late to start. So start thinking about this big picture idea of reskilling in the context of, who's this going to affect? How do we get our stakeholders involved, as we saw in that table I showed you a minute ago? But also, how are we going to know if this is effective? How are we going to know if this works? How are we going to know in the back end? What measurements can we think about before we start to understand if we've actually achieved our goals or not? So I want you to just walk away from this slide thinking, let's plan more, let's measure more. In general, those are good behaviors, and those are things that the business values from us as talent leaders. We just don't always prioritize them to the degree that we should. Another thing that we can do here is to really think critically about that skills map, that inventory that we have of the talent and the skills and the competency levels of those skills in the business. I mentioned that company earlier, the financial services company, 36,000 employees walking around. They had no idea what their skills were. If that company, and the way that we wrap that conversation, coincidentally, when I was talking to their team, the way we wrap that conversation was, if you can improve that by just 10%, you are twice as good as you are today. If you can just understand 4,000 more people, you're twice as good as you are today. And it's a long road, but you can start there. And I would encourage you to think about, regardless of where you are in that maturity of understanding the skills on your team, we need to think about that and how to get better at it. A couple of years ago, IBM actually started this practice where they realized that their employees were taking a lot of training and doing a lot of learning, but it wasn't always along the lines of the things the business thought were most important. They had identified a handful of key things that people needed to know and do, and sometimes employees were taking that stuff and sometimes they weren't. So what they did as a leadership team is they started building into their regular meetings where they would look at the data on what kind of content people were consuming, what sort of training they were doing, to make sure they were on that path, that path to upskilling as an organization. They knew that everyone needed to have certain things, kind of like that Amazon example I gave you earlier. They knew everybody in their organization needs to have certain capabilities to be able to be competitive long term. And IBM was saying, let's focus on this. If it's important, let's measure it. Let's focus on it. Let's make this a priority. And they started doing that. And once they started doing that from a leadership perspective, it started coming down farther and farther into levels in the organization through the leadership chain. And people started really moving the needle in the right direction. They started moving towards those skills that were identified as important because the leadership team was paying attention to that and making sure that everyone understood how important those were in general. Whew. Okay, one other idea here, one other thought, because it seems really big to get your arms around if you're not sure what to do or how to start this. One way to think about this concept is to measure your progress along this line, along this journey to getting better clarity on your skills with something as simple as kind of a red, yellow, green. If you identify a handful of competencies from a leadership perspective and you say, okay, right now, we don't know. We're all a yellow, and as we start gathering some data, we find out, well, we're a red here because no one has that, or we're a green here. 80% of the people we're talking to actually have this capability. You start to understand that better, and you can visually see where you are. But that's a really simple way to, again, probably align with a lot of the dashboards and things your leadership team uses, red, yellow, green, but also just to give you a quick at a glance perspective of how well you're doing and how much clarity you have on some of those skills and the capabilities. One other thing I want to encourage you of is we've talked a lot about, and the examples I've given in a lot of cases are on hard skills, but soft skills are incredibly important. Actually, the CEO of LinkedIn recently said that the thing he looks for most in an employee, and they're a tech company. LinkedIn is a tech company, but the CEO said the thing I look for most is soft skills. Someone's adaptability, their ability to, think outside the box and be creative. That's what I'm looking for most when I'm hiring someone, not just their ability to code or write a few lines of script or something like that. It's something else entirely, because he knows that long term, those employees will be more adaptable, more viable, more able to change, more agile than someone who can just code really well but doesn't have those other kind of soft skills. So I'll give you a quick piece of research that we've been kind of working with in the last year or so to help illustrate this point, where we keep hearing about all the great things automation can do. We keep hearing about artificial intelligence, and we hear about machine learning, and these things are important and they are valuable. But I would argue, and the data show, that those things are not more valuable than the creativity that humans bring to the table. And so when we're thinking about the reskilling, upskilling piece, make sure we don't forget those core human skills and the capabilities that make us human. So this chart here shows a gentleman by the name of Dennis Stouffer a couple of years ago did a piece of research looking at founders of tech companies. And he looked specifically, he wanted to understand their innovativeness score or their creativity score. So he gave them an assessment. And what he found was for the companies here on the right side where the yellow line kind of hockey sticks up, those people with the highest scores had tremendously different value than you would have expected. If that yellow line was linear, it would just kind of continued on that straight path. But it spiked dramatically at the very end there. And what he found was those high scorers had better results, outsized results compared to everybody else. They created more profit, more revenue, more jobs, more value for the entire population, right? The entire economy than someone would have expected from the outside. And what that all tied back to was their innovativeness score. In this study, their creativity. And that's a reminder, we can automate a lot of things, and automation has value because it takes away things that we might not want to do or might not need to do because algorithms are just better at it. But that doesn't create new value. The human creativity, the things that we bring in terms of human skills, that's something that's going to continue to increase in importance as we see more of these tools continue to automate parts of the jobs and parts of the labor force that are out there right now. There are a handful of concepts that we use when we're talking about how to reskill people and how people actually learn. We always assume I can create a course, throw an e-learning piece out there, something else, and that's how they're going to learn best. And the next two slides will show you that that's actually not true. So the first piece is, if you've ever heard of the 70-20-10 model, it says that 70% of the way we learn as humans is experiential, is hands-on. 20% is collaborative, social engagement with other people, and 10% is through formal training and learning content. But 70% of that is informal, as hands-on experiential. So a couple things when you're thinking about, okay, we're going to reskill our people. Let's think about how we're going to do this, create some sort of process or practice, some sort of content to make sure we hit that objective. A couple things to keep in mind. Number one, it doesn't surprise you to hear this, but your people have a limited amount of time to learn and reskill or upskill. There are many distractions that compete for their attention, and that's not just distractions in terms of the work they have to do, but in terms of other things. If they have an extra 20 minutes, they might rather spend that on Netflix or some other sort of content. They might rather spend that socializing with others. So you have to make sure that it grabs their attention, that it gets them engaged, that it gets them actively trying out the things that you want them to learn. Give them as immediate as possible an opportunity to put that into practice, because it enables them to lock that in and they remember it long term. Speaking of remembering, learners forget easily. The Ebbinghaus forgetting curve is ages old, but it's a curve a scientist actually went through and looked at how much we retain after we've experienced like a lecture, for example. And what he found was you forget about half of that within a few days if you don't have that reinforced, or if you don't have a way to put that into practice so that it kind of cements it in your mind. So learners forget things easily. So if we're teaching them, we're reskilling them, we're developing new capabilities for their team or for them, we need to make sure they have an opportunity to try those things out and put those into practice quickly. Let me give you an example of that. So United Health Group, one of their teams inside the company is a technology team, and they compete with the Facebooks of the world and the Googles of the world and all the big tech companies. I mentioned everybody's a tech company now, and they're competing with those companies for technical talent. Well, when someone graduates from Stanford with a computer science degree, how high or how far down the list do you think United Health Group is the potential employer of choice? So they've actually created this new process where they use hackathons internally as a way to not just appeal to the people internally, help them develop new skills, help them learn new things, put them into practice immediately, so that cements that knowledge. But they're also using that to appeal to other candidates and draw in new people from an employer branding perspective. So it's got a couple different facets to it. And there's a really neat company I profiled a few years ago that's based here in Alabama, where I live. They have more patents than any other company in the state. And their team uses a regular cycle of hackathons where they decide, okay, you know what, machine learning is really, really critical. We're seeing more opportunities we could probably embed this in our products. So we're going to run a training course on this, and then we're going to immediately put those people into a hackathon so they can put those practices into place and learn how to do it as they're doing it. Learn it as you go. And it cements that for them. The third and final piece here is that humans are exploratory. Humans are natural explorers. It's how we're wired. Right? A long time ago, we wandered the savannas, but now we actually wander in terms of intellectual thinking. We're curious about things. We want to know more things. And coincidentally, that's also one of the core human skills we've identified is curiosity. In today's world, that's an important factor, because Harvard research shows that if you are curious, you are less likely to be biased against other people or against other groups, because you're more likely to challenge that thinking, that stereotype with, I'm not sure about that. Why? Why is that? I'm curious. Why? I want to know more. And you push back on those things if you're curious. So humans are exploratory. If you've ever read Dan Pink's book, Drive, it talks about the 3 things that engage someone and get them excited. And I'll give you a hint. None of those are money, right? None of those are awards. None of those are recognition. The things are autonomy and purpose and mastery. If we can create a work environment that gives people those things, that excites them, that makes them want to work harder, makes them want to give their effort because they're excited about it. And the one here that ties in that exploratory piece is mastery. I want to be an expert at something. Everyone wants to be an expert at something, and giving employees the opportunity to be an expert in the thing that they need to know about gives them a chance to really buy in and be excited and to show their capabilities on a level greater than if you just said, I'm going to put you in this role and you're just going to be in this role for the foreseeable future. Giving them the chance to say, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to be, gives them a better chance to really showcase those capabilities. All right, I know we're coming in on the end. I'm going to wrap this up with a quick story about DXC just to illustrate some of these points. The company is a technology company. They're also a consulting firm. And one of the things that's really got me is their CEO actually works with their talent and learning team and keeps tabs on the skills people are learning on a regular basis. And they actually, when I did the interview with their team, they said, you should be able to look at the kind of skills our people are gathering, the types of capabilities that they're picking up on a regular basis, and understand what kind of business we are. You don't look at that and think, oh, they're a healthcare firm. You don't look at that and think they're in financial services. No, you can tell that they're in the consulting and professional services because of the types of skills their employees are developing and growing. And that's a reminder for me and for all of us that the way we're approaching this problem, the way we're helping to reinforce the types of skills that people need to be picking up, is to highlight those things that are most important so that they know which track to run on, which way to go. And I know I'm running kind of close on time, Anthony, but if we have any questions, I know you got a couple of things here, but if we have any questions or anything else, someone can pop those in. If we don't get to them today, I know that we'll try to get to them after the fact.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Yeah, thank you for sharing all this insightful information. As you mentioned earlier, skills are the currency of a business. At Talent Guard, we believe a breakthrough arises when you can describe your business roles and paths for people in the context of skills. A skill or competency-based approach to describing your business transforms the capability of the forward-leaning HR organization. This approach transitions the conversation from impersonal talent management to a personal engagement with every employee to connect their path to the company's strategy. Organizations that make this transition will gain 5 essential competencies that allow their company to win in today's marketplace. I won't go into the details of each competency here, but this presentation will be made available to you once it is published on our website. If you believe in this approach to talent management, we would love to speak with you to learn how we can help you achieve your talent management goals. At this time, I would like to invite those listening along with us to ask questions they might have about today's presentation. Please feel free to type any questions you might have in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and answer those for you. I know that we only have a few minutes here, so we'll give everybody a moment to ask those in, and we can move right to those. All right, Ben, there are a few questions for you. How do they measure productivity when one's job is not as clearly defined, like being creative?
That is a much harder question to answer, for sure, when someone's creative. I actually liken it back to when working in compensation design, right? When someone's doing something that's very linear, very clear what the outcomes are, what the outputs are, it's much easier to compensate them on a piecemeal basis or to give them variable compensation. But if someone's having to be creative, it's harder to pull that off. So it's harder to measure the productivity there. And one of the big trends that we're actually looking at is in our research is HR needs to be in the business of productivity, but not in the productivity of let's squeeze every hour out of each individual that we can, but let's make sure that we're being productive in the right things. Let's make sure we're being productive in the areas that focus on creativity or focus on collaboration, because that's where the real value is being created, not just in trying to say, okay, I want you to be 10% more creative this week. It's really hard to measure what those actual outcomes are.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben. And this isn't a question, but I've got a nice comment for you. It says, "This is brilliant, worth watching again and sharing." So kudos to your research, Ben. Seems to really resonate with the audience here.
Awesome. I appreciate that.
We've got a few questions for you as well. Did the research on reskilling show anything else interesting or noteworthy?
I think one of the biggest things I walked away from that research with is the excitement that employers know and realize, even if we're not always good at it, we know and realize that it's less risky, it's less scary, it's less challenging to use someone internally and reskill them into a role versus trying to just hire from the outside always and exclusively. I think that excited me to see that employers agreed with those statements, that it was less risky to do those things. Again, we're not always good about doing that on a regular basis. We don't always have practice in place to support that. But I think that excited me to see that we do know that is a factor in the decision, and we support that.
Excellent. Let's see, we have one last one, it looks like. I know you presented a lot of information that makes the business case about why you should get started with reskilling or upskilling. But what are the first steps to get started with an initiative that involves reskilling or upskilling?
The first step is, goodness, and I said this earlier, I use the word easy to describe some things today, but I know this one isn't easy. It's one of those things that it is going to require effort, but it's worth it in the long run. It's worth the value of having these things really ironed out and having the clarity. Or if you had to right now, you could look at the skill depth and the competencies of any of your people. To be able to do that is so valuable. It's hard to describe how important that is, but it's not easy to start that. You've got to start by getting really clear on the capabilities of your people and what they can do. And I gave someone an example the other day because they asked about, like, how do I start that? And I said, well, think about 5 people you work with right now. Now start listing 10 skills that each of them have. Most of them will be really hard pressed to do that when we're getting farther down that list. And for those people that are farther outside of our immediate circle of friends or connections that we have, that just goes to show that this can't purely be a human thing. We can't have someone tracking this and trying to keep tabs on it. You've got to have a piece of technology in place. And our research actually shows that companies that are at the strategic level, at the highest level of maturity for things like talent ability, have a technology in place to support that, because that enables the rest of their team to focus on more valuable strategy, more valuable tasks than just trying to track the skills and things like that on a granular level.
Excellent. Actually, there's a few more coming in here. One asks, is there an associated white paper that summarizes Ben's finding? And go ahead and answer that for this user. Yes, we will be able to email everyone that attended this webinar a white paper that Ben and Lighthouse Research has put together. So yes to that question. And Ben, if you want to add in anything there, please feel free.
The white paper will share some stories, some examples. Again, try to make it very practical for you. But if there's something else that you run across, I know that Anthony has both of our contact information at the end of this deck that we're about to show. If you have other questions that either of us can answer for you, I know that we'll be glad to. But definitely, the white paper has some really good insights and some of our research in there to help you hopefully take this beyond your team into a company-wide kind of initiative.
Excellent. And just to add to that comment as well, this webinar was recorded and it will be published on the Talent Guard's website. Once it's made available, it will be emailed to all of you as well. And then let's see, it looks like we'll get to these last two, and then I think we need to wrap it up just to be cognizant of everyone's time here, but we are very thankful for everyone joining today. Here's one question for you, Ben. How do you measure if a person is a good candidate to reskill?
In terms of how to understand that easily, it's hard to say there's a definite criteria. Someone has this or they don't that makes them a potential for that. I mentioned the example earlier, how LinkedIn hires, they're looking for those things. A good assessment can help you understand someone's adaptability or their capability, their ability to work with uncertainty or work with change. Those people that have those kinds of capabilities are going to be better fit for the opportunity to do that. I actually talked to the head of talent for a large organization recently, a couple thousand employees, and they were telling me that they are moving part of their workforce to another state. They're one of their business units in another state, and those employees that are currently there have the opportunity to apply for their jobs. They'll pay full relocation, 100%, every penny of the cost covered by the company. And most of those employees have come out and said, I am not even competitive enough in my skills to apply for my own job somewhere else. I've realized I've let myself go so long. I haven't been adaptable. I haven't been preparing for this. And so that's an example of the kind of person you've got to be careful of. And part of that's on them, part of that's on us as employers. But the short version to your answer, there's not a specific thing, but definitely an assessment would help you understand someone's ability to tolerate risk, to tolerate uncertainty, and to adapt to that.
Thank you, Ben. And this is the last one we'll get to. I apologize if we can't get to everyone's question today, but very, very excited that we have so much engagement in asking all these questions. So last question is, have you seen a difference in the response to some of your questions based upon generational differences?
That is so funny to hear that. Absolutely, yes. So one of the first things that I looked at when that study came in is how different age groups, age ranges actually responded to the question about their uncertainty, their fear. And in general, the survey respondents who were older seemed to indicate they were more worried, more fearful of that. Does that mean that they are actually at more risk? Not necessarily. That's just their perception. But that's a reminder for us as business leaders that are engaging with our entire workforce population that some of them may be more worried than others. Some people might say, hey, no big deal. Cool. Sounds like a different job change. I'm okay with that. Let's reskill. Other ones might see that as a very clear threat, not just to their job, but to their family, their livelihood, how they feed their kids. And so have a little compassion in how you're approaching that and how you're dealing with that in a delicate manner, because while we're talking about the hard skills, and we talked today was a very nuts and bolts factual conversation, there's a lot of emotion wrapped up in some of those things. And that's a really, really great question to wrap up on, because it's a good reminder that we're in the people business for sure.
At this time, I would like to thank everyone who joined us on today's webinar. And I would like to especially thank Ben for delivering to us the latest research on this subject. If you have questions for either Talent Guard or Ben in Lighthouse Research, you can find our contact information here on the screen. Also provided are links to the Lighthouse Research website and Talent Guard's website, where you can request a demo of our software to begin addressing your reskilling and upskilling challenges. Again, thank you everybody for joining. Once this webinar is published on our website, we will send you a version of it. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Ben.